Question 8, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Executive when it will reply to the responses submitted to the consultation on the second National Planning Framework.
Stewart Stevenson.
An analysis report of the consultation responses received in the National Planning Framework 2 discussion draft will be published later in the autumn, at the same time as the proposed National Planning Framework is laid before Parliament for consideration.
Coffey.
Can I thank the Minister for his reply? The Minister will be aware that Ayrshire has experienced both population and economic decline over recent years. Not surprisingly, then, responses to the draft framework called for greater recognition of Ayrshire's strategic importance to Scotland. Will the Minister ensure that the revised framework sets out how improvements to Ayrshire's transport links can act as a catalyst for economic growth within Ayrshire and not just as a faster commute to Glasgow and beyond?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've recently announced some significant investments in new rolling stock for the railways, which will benefit Ayrshire in particular. But in the context of the National Planning Framework, this is a planning document which, of course, is proceeding forward and will be subject to parliamentary review for a period of 60 days. We also have the Strategic Transport Projects Review, which will be being published later this autumn, which directly reflects this government's plans going forward for transport. The National Planning Framework in its new form will undoubtedly reflect more of the geographical needs of wider Scotland, including, of course, private sector projects as well as government projects, and is essentially a planning document that is truly planning for the future to 2030.
Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. Is it possible, in the light of collapse of some airlines and withdrawal by others, in the light of the growing momentum for high-speed rail, in light of the government's own recognition of the phenomenon of peak oil, and in light of the UK Climate Change Committee's recommendation that aviation emissions must be included within climate change targets, is it possible that the government's ambitions for aviation growth are misconceived and unrealistic, and if so, should the government cut capacity expansion from Glasgow and Edinburgh airports from the National Planning Framework?
Minister.
The member raised the subject of high-speed rail. Our ambitions, of course, do not stop at Leeds, but continue all the way to Edinburgh. It is interesting that, in fact, British Airways, for example, have a share of the equity in some rail companies, which indicates a willingness to engage in improved surface transport. Aviation is, however, an important part of our economy. Domestic aviation we should see being augmented by high-speed rail. That is the way of the future, and we in this government are determined to ensure that Westminster lives up to its responsibilities for cross-border rail activities and the financing that it retains in its budgets to support that.